So it seems that the rumours of Yarrick's death weren't exaggerated. Perhaps one of the best known Guard heroes is officially Lord Dead. Games Workshop just confirmed as much in the new Astra Militarum Codex. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today I thought we'd just take a quick video to talk about one of the biggest changes in the new Guard Codex. A couple of weeks back we talked about all the characters that were getting removed from the Guard Codex, at least according to the leaks. It does seem that those leaks were entirely accurate. A bunch of characters are gone, swept away by the ravages of time and warfare, and Commissar Sebastian Yarrick foremost amongst them. I suspect the vast majority of people watching will know well who Commissar Yarrick is. He's a legendary commissar of the Imperial Guard, and rose to fame in the defence of Hades' Hive against the Orcs during the Second War of Armageddon, perhaps most famously taking on an Orc warboss in single combat and winning. It cost him his arm, but he was able to take the Brute's power claw, basically use that as a bionic arm, and went on to be a bitter enemy of Orc warboss Ghazghkull Thraka, leading the Imperial Guard to victory on so many fronts against the Greenskins that he became an iconic human that even the Greenskins respected, and Ghazghkull treated as a favoured rival, someone who you could have a properly good fight against if you needed. Additional light was shone on that whole story from Games Workshop's recent Hammer and Bolter episode, when Runterd tells the tale of the legendary rivalry between the war boss and the Commissar. Lore-wise for the Imperial Guard, he's probably the best known character out of any of them, perhaps only really rivaled by Castellan Creed, and he himself has been replaced by his daughter after a rather cheeky Necron captured him. It does mean that his death's quite big news if you're basically taking a Warhammer faction and striking down one of its greatest leaders, and it had already been fairly heavily rumoured elsewhere, particularly that his rules weren't in the new Guard Codex from the Mordian Glory leaks, and the slightly ominous fact that his miniature had been range rotated, where Games Workshop subs out their old Redden kits and in theory brings them back at some point. The last lore for the Commissar had him setting off in pursuit of Ghazghkull Thraka, potentially not a deed that's conducive to living an awful lot of time. Plus on top of that, he was basically a normal human who had already lived centuries at the time of the close of the 41st millennium, and in the Indomitus era with all the Primaris Space Marines, the lore has moved on quite a bit of time since then. Even if he weren't to meet an untimely end in combat in the Emperor's service, then natural causes would perhaps be a pretty reasonable explanation. I was certainly wondering if we get an explanation in the new Guard Codex, either just a small snippet of lore, or even just saying that Yarrick is missing in action, presumed dead, but Games Workshop really seemed to have embraced that, and had basically decided to move the narrative on with him, and basically had a great big double-page eulogy in the Guard Codex, entitled De Gloria Yarrick, telling a little of his great deeds in some rather archaic Imperial language, recounting some of his noble deeds of his life, and then basically confirming that he wasn't alive anymore, both in the text and also with a skeletal picture of Mr. Yarrick laying at rest, resplendent in fancy hats and bale eye gleaming in the darkness. The actual language that they use are that the Emperor asked him to lay down his weapons and join his side. To be honest, as it goes, that doesn't sound particularly violent, but it really doesn't confirm too much as to whether or not he was killed in combat, or whether or not old age just got the better of him after all, and he wasn't able to catch up with Ghazghkull. I do kind of wonder if they may be keeping his death intentionally vague at this point, maybe just in case they ever want to write a novel to detail his last campaigns and really give him the send-off he deserves. Or in the age of Warhammer Plus and animations and things, I guess they could even choose to tell the story in an animated short if they'd want to. I feel like as hooks go to check out their streaming service, that would probably be quite a big one. I've seen a fair amount of debate lore-wise about how he might have died. I feel like a lot of people are basically pointing at saying that Angron might have been the one that killed him. We do have new World Eaters on the horizon at the moment. Angron does have a new model in the works, and Armageddon was one of the last places that Angron was notably seen, banished in the First War there. It's certainly not out of the question that she could return to the same war zone and find himself fighting up against the Steel Legion and Yarrick. A couple of people have even pointed out that one of the skulls that Angron carries around at the moment does appear to have a bionic eye on the left eye, though to be honest that isn't a particularly unexpected thing given the Imperium and augmentations and things. I must say though that would be some pretty spectacular forward planning if Games Workshop did wind up having tied in Angron's miniature with Yarrick's death, though if this is really Yarrick's skeleton that they have next to his eulogy and everything, then it's maybe a surprisingly intact skeleton if he's just been in a scrap with a demon Primarch. I wouldn't really expect to have that much of him left. I guess there's always the debate as to whether or not he could come back. I guess Games Workshop could maybe bring him back as some sort of Imperial living sate, though I think that might be a little bit unlikely, And I feel like a dramatic transformation like that might just be kind of at odds with his core character and storyline. Maybe for the same reason that they didn't decide to promote him to a Lord Solar and change the look and feel of him to someone who's all in gold and rides a great big horse. I'd guess they might bring back his resin miniature from time to time as a range rotation one that you might be able to pick up as a nostalgia mini. And I guess it's certainly not out of the question they might do a resculpt of him at some stage, even if they just gave him rules as a historical character that you could play for the Guard. That wouldn't necessarily be enormously out of keeping with what they've done before. In general, I do find the idea of killing characters in 40k a bit of an interesting one. I do feel that when people write 40k lore and there's named characters involved that have current miniatures, they often tended to be protected by a decent amount of plot armor. You might have two major figures fighting each other with all of the strength of their armies at their command. They might well get into one-on-one combat, but inevitably everyone just winds up getting a bit injured and then going off to patch themselves up. It can just maybe mean that the narrative feels like it just doesn't have quite as much consequence as otherwise. It just seems at odds with 40k just being a ridiculously dangerous place with all sorts of ancient and unknowable threats at every turn. I would expect that in a lot of conflicts, one side will just get absolutely destroyed, even if they happen to have a cool guy on their side who fights well in one particular way. Maybe it makes even more sense than normal for Guard characters, perhaps. The Guard heroes in particular are sort of famous because they are mortals and they don't endure the same sort of protection as Space Marines. Plus, lore-wise, they would be aging and dying fairly naturally. Not that that's necessarily a problem for the other races, some of whom are equally short-lived. It does also seem a little bit at odds with characters like Strachan and Harker remaining in the Guard Codex. Maybe growing up on Kaschan allows you to deal with the horrors of old age, along with all the various man-eating plants. On the other hand, I certainly can see why Games Workshop don't tend to kill off their iconic characters very quickly. If you built a whole load of time and effort all into making one character awesome and people know them, then if you suddenly kill them off, then you sort of undo a fair bit of that work. I guess they can go down in 40k history, but it does pretty much close the chapter on anything else new that they could do in the future. It sort of feels like it's going to be a bit of a turn off for model sales, to be honest. Maybe a little bit harder to make them feel current or important if they're a dead character, though it hasn't stopped certain characters in the Horus Heresy series being really quite popular and getting their own miniatures. There's also the example of Captain Tycho in 40k, another character of Armageddon who fell to the Death Company and died, but it hasn't stopped them selling his miniature for quite a lot of the last 20 years. I guess if you do want to use the Yarrick model in game, then I think you could still proxy him fairly well. You could perhaps use the datasheet for that Cadian Castellan, and he could take the Warlord trait that allows him to issue Commissar orders, or maybe just a standard Commissar and give him something like the Claw of the Desert Tigers relic to represent the additional fightiness afforded by that claw. I'll be interested to hear what you guys make of all this though. Is killing characters in 40k and specifically Yarrick a good idea or not? And do you think that Games Workshop will be planning to do anything more with the story of his death? Looking forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments as per always. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I will get the full review of the Astra Militarum Codex out just as soon as I can. Looking forward to digging into the Guard rules in a bit more depth. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked down in the video description if you're interested. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.